as the world faces an existential climate crisis, we must collaborate to achieve the scale, pace, and transformation required to accelerate and execute sustainable innovation. The complex sustainability challenges we confront cannot be solved by a single company. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the inaugural event of OneEarth Dialogue, a series which brings together changemakers from various sectors set out to make a difference on climate, sustainability, and ESG. This event is in partnership with Daily Hunt and Shiv Nada University. There is no denying that almost everything that we do today has an impact on climate change, which in turn affects our life. This is an issue that cannot be ignored any longer. The good news is that there is a massive opportunity around climate innovation. Climate innovation is the innovation which lies at the intersection of value creation, that is, creating a business advantage for stakeholders, and climate impact, that is, accelerating climate action and enabling the 1.5 degrees Celsius target. According to an IFC report launched in November 2021, there is a market of nearly $23 trillion in opportunities for climate smart investments in emerging markets between now and 2030. With this, let's dive into the first panel, which is on climate innovation. I welcome all my panelists here. So firstly, we have Mr. Sanjay Khare, who's the board member and vice president of sustainability at Skoda Auto Volkswagen India Limited. Welcome, Sanjay sir. So Sanjay sir is an alumni from IIT and is the member of the executive board of Skoda Auto Volkswagen India. He's also a certified independent director by the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. So welcome to the panel, sir.
Thank you, Urja.
Yeah. Next, we have Mr. Amar. Mr. Amar is the senior manager at Delphi, Germany, with over 10 years of experience in development, management, and implementation of multi-country, multi-stakeholder programs in resource efficiency, circular economy, sustainable entrepreneurship, and green financing. His work at Delphi also emphasizes on capacity building of small and growing social and environmental enterprises in developing countries through business advisory. Welcome to the panel, Amar.
Thank you very much, Urja. Hello, Sanjay ji.
Hi, Amar. Thank you. Meeting you once again in a month's time. So great.
Exactly.
And lastly, we also have Shashwat. So Shashwat will be joining soon. And he is also an IIT alumni. He's the founder of Infinity Box, which is creating a closed-loop tech infrastructure to promote reusable containers for food deliveries. He has previously worked at an impact-focused fund, which is Sagana, and where he looked at food tech, alternatives to plastic, and climate-related solutions. Hi, I see Shashwat here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real privilege to be here, and I really look forward to the discussion today.
Thanks, Shashwat. So starting with the panel, the first question is definitely that, we have been seeing these trends that many governments and corporations across the globe are collaborating on an agreed goal of net zero to help combat climate. So starting with you, Sanjay sir, so if you could shed some light on some of the shifts that you have seen in your industry towards climate and sustainability.
So sure. I think it all got a lot of impetus from 2015 Paris Climate Agreement. The time globally, all the governments and major corporations together decided that they will clip the emissions to 2 degrees centigrade. In fact, the very base is that all about the years since start of the industrial age, since 1850s, time we started using coal and the time we started using the fossil fuel, we have been burning the earth with a lot of emissions. Point number one, that is all about CO2 from the atmosphere. And second thing is that we have been able to excavate the earth in a very, very, irresponsible way, how we have done the minings and everywhere. So now we have got two limitations. One is about the atmosphere around us, the CO2 in the atmosphere, and second thing is that what is there left in the earth. And the second big part of the equation is about the growing human population. Now we are going to reach a 8 billion populace. And all this populace needs a sustainable development. They need education, they need energy, they need health, and they need overall development. And in the meantime, we have to strike a balance with the nature also, with all the wildlife and the biodiversity also, because they are the ones who keep on sustaining us. So this equation is all about creating the balance between the resources and the requirements, and do it in such a responsible fashion that it does not hurt the earth. It does it in a beautiful way. For example, the way we produce energy today. The way we produce energy is basically coal or fossil fuel dependent. And that's where, I mean, more than almost 30% of human emissions go. Second is that how we make things, how we make steel, how we make aluminum, how we make raw materials, how we extract petroleum. Everything is highly dependent upon the energy, which is presently a gray energy or a dirty energy. Third, I think, was the biggest level of emissions or things come from transportation, particularly the land transportation. So land plus ship and air put together. But I think land transportation dominantly, that's where we belong to, is almost 14 to 15% of the emissions. And we as our own organization is almost contributing to 1% of the entire global emissions. The Volkswagen Group, we know this responsibility of ours. These are three dominant areas. Then after that, how we live, how we make our buildings, and how we do the agriculture. This is the fifth area which is having the next level of emissions. So dominantly today's date, 96% of living beings are something either human beings or they are our own poultry or on our farming animals. So, and very less 4% of space is left for the normal, uh, otherwise wildlife, and that's where causing the imbalance in the biodiversity also. So, all these five areas we have to work together so that we are reducing the imbalances. For example, we have got a Shashwat over here who's working on the area of food packaging. Wonderful ideas, and of course we have to give because all the days so much of migration is happening, people moving from smaller villages to bigger towns and from bigger towns to mega towns. And obviously there's going to be a business for things like Zomato. People are going to order foods, but how we do it in a much more responsible fashion, much more way that it's not causing any burden on the earth. It's very, very important. These are five areas. And if I talk about my own industry, so from 2015 onwards, we have signed a very strong statement called Go to Zero. Go to Zero is all about by 2050, in our entirety, we should be able to reduce the emissions to zero. And not just the emissions, is all about, I'll break it into the four parts. One is about decarbonization, is the climate change aspect. Second area is about resources. So whatever resources we are using, whether air or water or um, um, fuels, emissions in our plants, they should become to a zero level. Third area is about tailpipe emissions or air quality, and fourth is about environmental compliance. And all these things we are looking in the entire life cycle of a car. The entire life cycle of a car starts from extraction of resources, manufacturing the car, manufacturing the parts at our vendors, assembling them into a piece right now as a car, then sending it for use, and after that, at the end of it, at the end of life, how to recycle the things. That's typical about our present internal.
Sorry, I think there's some connectivity issue.
Am I audible now?
Yes, yes, sir.
Okay. So in the entire life cycle, if you see that the world is going towards electric cycle, electric or alternate internal combustion engines are going to be there because the transition is going to be there for the 10 years or 12 years, but the future is going to be electric. And electric means the vehicles are going to be much more autonomous. By 2030 or so, we would like to put some 4 crores autonomous vehicles on the roads. That's what's the global targets that we have. And accordingly, we are developing the right type of software, right type of hardware, right type of mechatronics, and right type of operating system for the cars. I mean, cars are going to update their software like mobiles today, very soon. So a lot of those technologies we are working upon, and all this is happening so that we can give a sustainable mobility to the world. How they can go from point A to point B in most comfortable, most luxurious fashion also. And in the meantime, they can fulfill all the other needs also. So my focus area remains around mobility. We're also working on some topics right now in the present cars, how we can use sustainable materials, how we can use recyclable plastics. For example, I mean, our new electric vehicle, which is already launched in Europe, and we've got some trial vehicles in India right now, we are getting 1,000 plastic bottles to be recycled, those fibers, and used in the seats and the interiors of the cars. So many such initiatives are taking place, and the transition has started happening. And it's better that we do it now, otherwise there's only one Earth, and it's important that we all work together so that we can clip it to 1 or 1.5 degrees. We already see that because of 1 degree centigrade rise, which has already happened, the type of
Yes.
climate disturbances we are seeing in India only this year. the type of heat waves which are there in the north or the west, and type of rains which are happening in the northeast. They all are very, very clear, significant factor that climate change is affecting us all. So we should not feel that, if we are not doing something about it, we can be safe. Ultimately, it's going to affect each one of us. So it's duty from each one of us, from each part of the society, from each area that we can contribute to this. And obviously, as Urja said, there's a big business opportunity into all this. But today, I say that economics and environment are two sides of the same coin development. So if we work on balancing the two, I think we can do a very good business and very good balance to the entire earth along with the human beings and the nature. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, and thank you for setting such a great context to why we're doing what we're doing. I think it's very important to go back to that, especially considering that this is the first time that we're starting this series. So a lot of more to come and a lot of more areas to cover. Now moving to Amar. So Amar, Sanjay sir also shared that there are lots of initiatives taken up by corporates, and you as a think tank, you also see a lot of interest and awareness. I think we were talking the other day about the same. So if you could shed some light on how that shift has taken place over time, and any opinion or anything on that.
Yeah, definitely. I think, as you rightly said, Sanjay sir has definitely put a foundation over there in terms of the overall topic. And I totally agree with all the 5 factors he has mentioned. And also the things which are happening in automobile sector are really, really rapid compared to the other sectors which are there. I basically, would start off saying that, if I recall 12 years back when I was deciding what kind of a master's I should go for, at that time I was the executive manager at one of the India's largest manufacturing sector, and I was very much interested into environment. And that time, fortunately or unfortunately, I will tell you why I say fortunately or unfortunately, is because fortunately or unfortunately, I was thinking I should do my master's in environmental field. And fortunately, it's because I'm currently working. Unfortunately, it's because it's really the hot topic right now. And something which since 12 years also we are still talking about, at least from my knowledge, which I have been decided at that time. But anyways, when it comes to the climate innovation, I would actually see it into 2 different aspects. One is as in general, climate mitigation and climate adaptation side. And in terms of climate mitigation, so many innovations are there, when so many examples are there, best case examples are there, best case scenarios are there. In terms of climate adaptation also, there are there. But adopting the ones which are in climate adaptation examples is very difficult, because it's a very regional specific, very, the environment specific, and also very national specific. The good thing is, you can actually replicate in terms of these kind of innovations, which is happening. And the question which you asked is in terms of a think tank, how we see it. You probably might know as well, and everybody knows as well, think tanks were known for doing more on the research side. And think tanks are changing that mindset from research to the think and do tank now. So I would also say, as Adelphi, we don't call ourselves nowadays think tank. We call ourselves think and do tank. So whatever the research has been done, whatever the thing in terms of the whatever related to policy or building the ecosystem, whatever the mechanisms we are actually thinking of, we are actually putting them as a programs or projects in terms of the climate change related aspects, and we have started working on it. Apart from that, I would say in terms of ecosystem players, everybody is now very much well aware of what kind of climate disaster we are into, and everybody, including corporates, are taking the initiative in terms of tackling, whether it comes to the resource efficiency side, or whether it comes to the circular economy side. Of course, resource efficiency, we talked 2 whole decades about resource efficiency and cleaner production. This is the era of talking about circular economy. And circular economy, I would say in each and every stage of circular economy, there is an innovation going on. And in each and every stage of circular economy, there is an opportunity for entrepreneurship for everyone. And as a country like India, who is coming up with a really good policies, which can actually support entrepreneurs, so this is really an opportunity for Indian entrepreneurs to grab it and move forward. And definitely somebody talks about the finances and all, because finances is one of the topic which will be like largely talked when it comes to these kind of clean tech startups, or let's say social and environmental startups. But the happy news or the good news is, like, one of the venture capital firm has done research that in past 2 years there have been a 5 billion investment went into the climate change related innovations. Of course, that's a small number when you compare it to the other kind of sectors, but this is started happening, and this is actually expected by the end of 2030. It is going to be 50 billion investment going into the climate innovation startups and all. So we are in a right path, I would say, but at the same time, we should also need to put the let's say mechanisms and a really good principles in place to move that kind of a money which is available in a right direction and to be available for the right people and the right innovation. Thank you.
Yes, definitely. Thanks, Amar. And I completely echo your thoughts with innovation and how you bring entrepreneurship at the forefront. And we have an entrepreneur here. So, Shashwat, I have two questions for you. So, firstly, is, I also want to understand from your personal journey, right? When you started Infinity Box to now, where you're actually, I believe that, you are receiving some recognition from the industry. So how's that journey been? And secondly, would also want to get into the funding aspect later and want to understand how that funding mechanism works. So how do fund managers see where to allocate the funds when it comes to different sectors, and what are the focus areas if you worked on something like this at Sagana?
So, I mean, again, thank you for having me, and I'll try and answer both the questions to the best of my ability. But I mean, the second question is still fairly easy because I did spend about 2 years in this space in investing in alternatives to single-use plastics globally. So, from different raw materials, different business models like reuse, refill, or even at the end of life, different early-stage recycling techniques that were coming up globally. And we so Sagana used to invest on behalf of multiple funds and families, and I used to invest on behalf of Circulate Capital. Circulate is a fund manager out of Singapore. They are the largest portfolio holders in recycling in plastics across Asia, and we have invested in almost all the recycling companies in the country and provided them growth capital and catalytic capital to get us to a space where India is utilizing its recycling capacity. So, over the last 2 years, what I have seen is, I would say, broadly three trends. One is that there are a lot of funds coming up uh, who are looking to invest in the whole climate tech bit, but they are still figuring out their entire thesis. What are the subsectors within climate tech that they would be interested in? Obviously, within mobility, EVs have come through, right? Batteries have come through, but that's a subsector within mobility. But then within climate tech, everybody has a sort of their own definition on how do they want to go about defining what falls under their thesis, what they're comfortable with, what they have experience with. But there's still a positive trend in that direction. Multiple funds, at least over $1 billion, have already come up in the country, right? If you take the cumulative AUMs, so that's a good sign. Early stage, late stage. The second thing that I've seen is there's a lot of startups, entrepreneurs who are coming up. Of course, when I say lot, the relative is with respect to climate tech 2 years ago, not a relative to a fintech or a generalistic industry, but the relative increase has been there, which is again great because then the quality and the competition increases over time. And then the last trend that I've seen is that the regulations have kicked in. So there are, for plastic specifically, since we are discussing that, a lot of the EPR laws have come in, which basically state that if you're a Coca-Cola and you put out 100 kgs of plastic, you have to collect 100 kgs back or recycle 100 kgs one way or the other and prove it. Otherwise, you have to pay taxes, right? And that is taken up significantly. So all of these three things. So there's a confluence of these three trends, which is sort of helping us move in the right direction, so to speak. And it doesn't mean that funding is easy, because this is still a nascent sector for most of the VCs, unlike a Circulate, which has been investing in this, right? But a generalistic VC, when they want to invest, for them, they need some poster childs, right? I mean, you don't have a Flipkart for climate tech in India today. So that's still a concern. So there will still be early stage bets that will come through, which is why we need more early stage funds. They are coming through. Angels are coming through. There are climate angels and others. but I would still say we need a more robust early stage or an angel investment system in the climate tech bit, right? Or the incubation system as well. Within the second part, where you asked me about how our journey has been, so Infinity Box has been, running for the last year and a half as an idea, where we are trying to where we started off because we realized that single-use plastic is a big problem, and food delivery touches us every day, right? I mean, today, Swiggy and Zomato do about 4 million orders a day in the country. That's a crazy number, and that's expected to like grow 5 times in the next 5 years. So you're looking at 20 million orders in the next like 5 years a day, and each order is about 2 containers. The amount of plastic waste that is generated is just, I mean, unbelievable. And beyond that, it is not as if it is collected or recycled because of its lightweight, right? So the way that the waste collection industry works is that those rack pickers collect waste on a dollar per kg basis. When you have a lightweight container like you use in food delivery versus a heavier plastic bottle or a PET bottle, you would rather go for a PET bottle, which is a much more standardized industry. So most of the containers that are used in food delivery are not really recycled, right? They're usually burnt or landfilled, and even today that number is over 50 million kgs a month. Like that's like 8 to 9 Eiffel Towers being stacked up every single month of just these food containers, and that's only going to increase. So what we started out what was the vision of becoming the default reuse platform for the country, because we obviously reuse has the best environmental footprint if you're able to get to a certain number of reuses, which varies according to industries. So today we started off with food delivery and we are live with Swiggy, we are live with multiple other meal subscription partners, and we are scaling, right? I mean, hopefully, if things go well in the next 3 months, we'll be the largest food reusable platform in the world. Because for India, that's still small, but for us, the market is so nascent that we are trying to capitalize on that. Beyond that, we also want to do quick commerce and e-commerce, and the work has already started. So for us, the journey has been obviously not as easy, because you are the category leader, you are the first mover, so you have to figure out things by yourself. And I mean, for every entrepreneur that's true, but in such a new space where a lot of people don't understand it, there is no global poster child, forget a local one. It is something, I mean, you have to figure out things by yourself. But I guess we're still very early, so hopefully we'll be able to crack that. And we'll be able to convince multiple people and stakeholders to come on board to help us move towards a mission of becoming the default reuse platform for the country.
Wow, that's incredible, and all the best, Shashwat, as you take on this. I've also gotten to know that like you're fully working onto this project now, so it's great to see that momentum, and we hope to see Infinity Box everywhere around us. So now moving on, definitely, like while you covered some of the challenges in the VC space and also in the entrepreneurship space. Um, Sanjay sir, I'm quite curious to understand what are some of the challenges that corporates are facing when it comes to sustainability or bringing sustainability in their organization.
So I think very simple and very important thing first is to know that uh, first we need to demystify the word called sustainability for every common person inside. I mean, I'm quite fortunate to have been working with big multinationals for some time now, and certainly with us, it's more like we are staying in a big university. Lot many knowledgeable people within us, and we are able to do a lot of knowledge sharing and a lot of ideation on these topics. Same is not true for MSME sector and other industries over here. So if I see the entire value chain, automotive major like us, like Volkswagen or Hyundai or Toyota or MRT, we certainly have got much more enlightenment inside, and we are able to invest into those technologies which can make the water totally pure water. For our recycling, we can invest into those technologies and those type of inputs where I can become a zero waste organization, which I have already become. I have become a water, not just zero liquid discharge, but also a water positive organization. Also, I have invested enough of my thoughts that we have become what we call one of our plants is going to be a zero carbon emission plant now. So all this is a possible in a big organization. The very first thing to demystify is that we have to carry this message to all the industries all around. We are dominantly dependent upon the MSME and the small sectors, and that's where a lot of this awareness needs to be carried out. The first and most simple, easy area to work upon is the manufacturing areas, where I'll say if you've got some 4 or 5 KPIs to work upon, say the use of energy, use of water. Energy should be obviously, non-carbon energy, renewable energy, waste, water, and biodiversity, and if some, say paints and all, then VOCs. So some type of 5 or 6 impact points can be there, and in cumulative they can be put as a KPI or as a measurement for the industry. And then let us see that how the industries come on reduction of that, because that is the first baby step we need to work upon. On the various resources, basically resource efficiencies in the organization I'm talking about. A huge big potential about it, but then the biggest thing I'm finding that level of awareness is absolutely lacking right now in most industries. So I have started talking to all my suppliers and also all my dealers, and I'm finding there's a big pull happening on this topic, because everybody sees that whatever we are able to save from the energy or save on the waste and water, everything is converting into money also. So I think this is the first challenge about creating the awareness on this topic, on decarbonization and resource efficiency. Second is about circular economy. That means whatever resources we are.
Sorry, I believe there's some technical challenge again.
So am I audible now? Am I
Yes.
audible now?
Yes.
Okay. So second topic is to work upon is the circular economy of the materials. So whatever the input materials are there, how do we ensure that these materials are brought back into the circular economy, either through reduce, recycle, reuse, repair, or repurposing, whatever ways. And I think one big thing that is happening right now on single-use plastics, everybody is talking around. A very simple thing like a straw, which is brought with the various packs, and we are not able to find a solution for that. So some such simple things we need to work upon. It's not always a rocket science which is needed. Sometimes a very small thing can make a difference if we can make the people carry their own stainless steel straws along, and then they can, so making the change in the behavior patterns of the people, educating them small thoughts, that can also really intensify the circular economy. It's not only about making major innovations, is all about the behavioral innovations that can be carried around this topic. So I'll say decarbonization and circular economy are the two areas I think where we need to do small behavioral changes, we need to do some small kaizens, and we need to bring the innovations also. That's all.
Definitely. Completely agreed, sir. And we've heard this famous quote that says that waste is a design flaw. So, how do we also embed design in such a way that that does not that mitigates the need for access or like excess produce or excess consumption of plastic. So, moving on to Amar. Similar, like again, the same question for you as well. So, what are some of the challenges that you've seen uh, as this space is moving fast?
Mhm. So I would say actually, like, I mean, I working very closely with the small and very medium-sized startups in this kind of a sector of a sustainability entrepreneurship sector. We discussed and we had, like, coached them on access to finance and all. As Shashwat said, like, there is finance available, and I also reiterate that there is finance available. But this access to finance for the early stage startups and the early growth startups, it's still a big question. The access to finance is available for the ones who are in the acceleration stage. So that is the big challenge as well. Like, we need to fill that gap. I mean, there is access to finance gap for the early stage ones, which are in the startup phase. And there is access to technology. Some of these very micro and let's say small kind of innovations, they really need access to technology. And that access to technology is also connected to the access to infrastructure. Many of the startups don't have that kind of a infrastructure to go for the R&Ds and also, like, test their products and yeah, basically in terms of the circular economy field. So that access to infrastructure is something which has to be also taken into consideration. But the biggest one is access to market. There are products, but how do you recognize these are actually green products, and how a consumer can understand, like, what is the positive or what is the negative of this product? There are so many certifications are coming in. There is no streamlined certification, which is like, let's say, like, when these kind of products, this is the certification which is being used. It's same as that of, when currently there is no ESG framework, and everybody has their own ESG frameworks. Yeah. So there are, like, this kind of access to market is connected to that kind of a green certification kind of a thing. So this is a big challenge as well, because consumers cannot understand, whether this is really a green product or whether it is a greenwashing product. And last but not the least one is the skill development and awareness. So skill development and awareness, of course, this kind of a challenge has been since long, and it is still existing, I would say, because the information flow or the whatever the best practices are there, they are still not being communicated, and how to actually build the labor force to accommodate or the accumulate for this kind of a circular economy flow or this kind of a climate innovation flow. It still need to be discussed, and still we need the support of technical institutions or NGOs in this one to have more emphasis on skill development of our labor force as well. So these are some of the five challenges which I feel that in terms of the climate innovation we still need to work on. Of course, having been said, there are small initiatives, small projects, or small let's say the programs have been running in this, but they have to be scaled up as well.
Yeah, definitely agreed on that. And like you were also mentioning about ecosystem, which is extremely important. And without that, Shashwat was also mentioning about the poster child of that startup, right? Which sets that. So it's I think the ecosystem which enables that and helps bring organizations which act as pioneers in this space. So Shashwat would want to hear your thoughts, but you've briefly mentioned on the challenges. So if you could elaborate on those as well.
So, I mean, if you're still discussing on the whole funding aspect, right, and there being a lack of a framework, as Amar pointed out, I mean, the challenges would vary according to the industry drastically, right? So the challenges that you face in a plastic versus an EV are very, very different than what they were, let's say, 5 years ago, because the amount of uh, regulations, the amount of corporate input that has gone into it, and versus the amount of companies that have come up, it's very different. So I think when we say that there are challenges, we have to be very, very specific about this, the sector that you're talking about, and how that has evolved over the years. So for us, I mean, if you think about plastics, right, I think what where what I have seen is there has been some development across the globe. I mean, plastic credits exist today, right? I mean, it has taken a certain standard to be developed, which we developed, help develop at Circulate also. But we're still not at that stage where it is as acceptable as carbon credits, right? We are still not at that stage where you can consider that as a significant portion of your revenue, which would help you scale faster as an early stage company, which is very important because it's just not that widely accepted and it will take some time. I know I can't quantify that time for you, but then we are we have had that positive increment in where we were, like getting that standard out there, but the wide adoption, the regulatory framework around it is still missing, versus an EV where we didn't have any framework, let's say 5-7 years ago, but now there are like the Tatas of the world are doing it, and they're the largest battery and the recharging network out there. So things have evolved very differently for different sectors, and what I think needs to happen is the early stage funding and incubation has to happen for all the sectors irrespective, and as Amar was pointing out, the regulatory framework needs to be standardized for different sectors by listening to the problems that different stakeholders suggest in that ecosystem, right? I mean, you can't have some just have a Ministry of Environment which talks about everything. There have to be dedicated people who understand problems faced by the stakeholders in each specific industry, because each industry is large in itself and has a huge impact. So that is where I am getting at, that we need more interactive regulatory framework making and early stage investments. Otherwise, the challenges that, let's say, a plastic faces today versus a tire industry might face 2, 3, 4 years later. I mean, tires also produce a huge amount of waste, right? Like the rubber that burns off, but there are no regulations around it. There are startups globally that are trying to solve that, but we haven't gotten to that. So unless there is dedicated investment of time and money across subsectors, there will always be a lag between the development of each sector and different challenges that each entrepreneur or VC faces in each subsector.
Definitely. And as you were also saying, so we have Tesla in the EV space, which is doing well, and therefore there is a lot of they've already created that innovation, which is giving a lot of leeway or like that roadmap for other organizations to take up. So definitely agreed on all these points. And moving back to Sanjay sir, so I just we were earlier also discussing, Sanjay sir, that there is a lot of potential in the Indian ecosystem, not just in terms of talent, but also in terms of how much natural resources that we have, right? And this varies from country to country. So how can we leverage this to our advantage, and help in building business opportunities for different organizations that are building in this space?
So I think we are just now discussing Tesla. So companies like Tesla and Volkswagen, we have developed very strong operating systems and platforms for four-wheeler. So these are robust ones, so that the cases like fires and overheat of the battery or the heat management of the batteries, which are being caused in many of the new two-wheelers in India, and very recently was a four-wheeler fire also. So this safety concern needs to be addressed in a very, very strong way. Right now, in India, particularly, I'll say two-wheeler is going to be the biggest market, two-wheeler and three-wheelers. Unfortunately, we still do not have a standard for these operating entire standard for the say, hardware and the software part of the two-wheeler system, like the type of standards which have been developed by Tesla or Volkswagen for the four-wheelers are still yet not there in the two-wheeler ecosystem. So that is one.
Yeah, can't hear Sanjay sir.
Am I audible now?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay. So one thing is that we built safety and robustness into the two-wheeler and three-wheeler ecosystem. Four-wheelers, if you follow these global makers, they are certainly going to bring in a lot of very good technology. And we can support them from India. Indian talent can support them very much into the software and hardware development parts. So this is the part, I think, say about the four-wheeler and two-wheeler on the technology part. The time we are working on autonomous vehicles, which are going to be working very well in Europe and US areas, type of software developments we can do for small parts. That also is a very useful area to work upon. Second area is about the circular economy. So the type of materials which are going to be used in the new vehicles. I just told you about interiors. So how can we use recyclates? How we can use natural materials like maybe jute or maybe something similar for the cars. So this is a very important area to work upon. And it's more focused should be on the new electric vehicles, the new technologies which are going to come, how we start working on them right away. Third area to work upon is additive manufacturing, that is 3D printing and all, because that will bring in a lot of flexibility into the manufacturing processes, because right now everything is based upon tools and dies which are used in prototyping or in the final vehicle making of the jigs and fixtures. The time we come to 3D manufacturing of cars, that will be one ultimate thing where the things will become much more simplified. And right one. And fourth area is all about working upon the entire ecosystem of reuse and repurpose. So maybe in the times to come, it's not about going to be only purchasing a car. It's all about the ownership of the car, maybe for a day or maybe for a month or maybe for a year. And that will help with the circular economy. That will help with the proper utilization of the cars. So right now, whatever two-wheeler or four-wheeler we buy on a personal basis, it's not used even for 5%. So how we can work on bringing the capacity utilization of these challenges. Fourth area will be around development of sustainable city transportation. So it's all about a new person who comes and joins a new company in Bangalore. The time he has to go from point A to point B, just a distance of from Marathali to Sarjapur, a distance of 10 kilometers, maybe he'll end up traveling for 1.5 hours one way. So how we can make the whole process of that movement from A to B easier. No mobility is also mobility. Maybe work from home is an option where we should see. Second thing is how we can use micro mobility. Maybe bikes, or I mean, right now a lot of startups have come upon even bike taxis also. Then Ola, Uber, and obviously the big transports of the entire city transports of this thing, say metro railways and the feeder buses and all. So we have to see mobility in totality, and for each and every part which I have told, a problem needs to be solved, and that's where an opportunity lies for the startups and younger people to bring in their specific ideas, how exactly this whole thing will work. And also we see that a lot of development is going to happen in the big cities, where the people are moving from smaller towns and smaller villages, and how we can ensure that these places, we can ensure that their mobility and their quality of living is equally as good. Also, can we stop this migration by bringing the right type of education and right type of work from home or right of tech opportunities at their own villages and their own small towns also. So this is a broad thought process. As I said that I foresee in the next 5 to 10 years only, which a lot of possibilities are there for people to work on today. Thank you.
Definitely, completely echo your thoughts, sir. And like you said, I think the perspective needs to change. Like
Urja, one request. I think I am not that old to call me as sir. You can call me Sanjay.
sure, sure.
Okay.
Great.
Okay.
So, yeah, like I was saying that that perspective or the mindset needs to change, and that's what came through that entire conversation where you talked about, like various frameworks and various mindset that needs to change, right? That concept of mobility needs to shift from just taking a taxi or taking a cab, but it can also move to other forms of mobility, other ways that mobility can happen, and how can you also like see the benefits of mobility, right? To take it up, right? Whether it's a work from home or whether it's a go to office, right? So definitely, like moving on to Amar, would also want to understand, like from your experiences and from your work, in terms of what are some of the opportunities for the Indian ecosystem, especially, and how can we leverage this as a business incentive for a lot of people who are in the space.
Mhm. Actually, like, I would like to touch upon something which you mentioned about the business case. All the policies and regulations and all, they lack starting point is like, they don't talk about the business case first. First and foremost thing is like, then do the needs assessment. If you want to bring any policy of whatever, banning of single-use plastic or any policy, do the business case and, communicate that business case to the audience and the, make the information flow and the aware the audience or entrepreneurs, like what is the business case for you guys if we are going to ban that. So this kind of a communication should start happening, even just coming up with only rules or regulation. So as Sanjay has said that, when there are so many fields where one can see opportunity, whether it is technology, whether it is just IT or a software side, whether it is just in terms of the smart city side, or any kind of a circular economy sector or something. But first and foremost thing is like, think about the business case, what you can going to pitch to the audience or to the citizens, so that they can also profit by doing those kind of things. And a second thing is basically like, just to give an example about the business case is that we were just debating, or let's say talking within our colleagues, like we're discussing about, okay, there is a textile sector, there is a plastic sector, there is a e-waste sector. There is so much of popping up from the e-waste sector, like startups and all are popping up, and they have been working since long. Why the textile sector is still not been successful, even though there is so much of money pooling in and all. So it's also a clear-cut example of the business case. When in the e-waste sector, we know that there are precious metals that can be recovered and all. But there is this kind of a mindset, or this kind of a information has been flowing since decade now about the e-waste sector, that you can definitely encash from the waste of that one. But what about the textile sector? So there are been initiatives, there is been very less talked about it, there are been donor funded projects and all happening, but there is not such of an innovation which we can see over here, like which is largely taken from the industries in the textile sector. And the plastic one, which is booming up right now, of course, people started understanding about the business case of the plastics. There is alternative plastic, or there is avoidance of the plastic, and there are so many business cases which plastic sector is coming up with. So this whole business case, which term you have used, is something which has to be like communicated for each and every sector before we move into that kind of a circularity of that sector. So yeah.
Definitely agreed, and that's how you also incentivize, or again, you keep it sustainable, right? It needs to be sustainable for people who are also doing the work on ground. Shashwat, for you, just wanted to, like, I think Amar and Sanjay both have covered the importance of, or the challenges, or the opportunities for the Indian ecosystem in when they want to start into sustainability, but also want to understand the role of ecosystem. So what is, like, what is the importance, and how can we develop an ecosystem which helps different organizations, startups which are working in this space, and collaborate and help drive this mission?
I mean, if there was a ready-made answer, I'd be the happiest person in the world. I think again, ecosystem has to be broken down into the different stakeholders. It's usually a corporate or a business, and consumers, your startup, and regulators. Right? These are the usual stakeholders in any business that you're setting up. Now the problem is that given the lack of standards that Amar was referring to, there isn't really a set of rules for everybody to follow, or set of the scope of each stakeholder is not really set out today, right? Because of which we still stick to the existing idea of keeping the prices for single use and reuse the same, despite the fact that more resources go into it, and you're not essentially taxing for carbon and stuff. I mean, there are like 100 implications of not having a set of rules, right? So I think the first step to move towards an ecosystem where everybody can collaborate is actually know what everybody is supposed to do, which is setting out their scope very specifically, have the right incentives or penalties in place, which can usually just be enforced by regulators, right? I mean, there's only a certain scale to which a small business can grow to without regulations helping them. I mean, and the flip side is that if the regulations help them, that they can grow very quickly. I mean, if you look at it, I mean, when Mr. Sanjay was referring to circular economy or reusing certain materials, not letting them go to waste. If you look at European nations, the regulations have come up in a very strict manner and very strict and quick manner, right? I mean, in the last few years, you've seen multiple startups get like a lot of money, a lot of traction, just because the regulators have made it, a very simple point that you have to do this, otherwise you'll be penalized. So everybody has had to take action, because beyond a certain point, everybody knows that yeah, sure, there's a triple bottom line, but then the second bottom line is still profits. So nobody is going to go give away profits anytime soon. So unless the regulators make it sort of necessary for corporates or consumers or the businesses to change their accounting methods, for that matter, or to change the way that they operate, it's really going to be very difficult for all the stakeholders in the ecosystem to come together. So what I think is that everybody obviously has to participate, but there has to be a scope that has to be set out, and that is usually the role of a regulator. Because then if one corporate tries to do so and the competitor doesn't, then they lose out on profits, and that never really works out, right? So I think that is where it has to start, and there is precedence for this across the world, like whether it's Oceania or Europe, even parts of South Africa. Uh, all of them have very stringent laws that have come up. So we just have to follow suit.
Yeah, and completely, like you said, the three four points that I could get from here was that identify the scope of the community. Then how do we bring in global collaboration so that we follow the best practices? Say there's EU taxonomy, so how do we refer to that? Bring in policies which are relevant to the Indian context. Thirdly, then there is how do we regulate the policies and frameworks on a daily basis and set out standards that other organizations or the organizations which are part of that particular ecosystem can follow. uh, any, like, just I wanted to move to Amar, and if you wanted to add something to this list.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the regulatory, it's basically the topic. Like we have been talking very recent terms in India about like sustainability or circular economy or resource efficiency related regulatories and all. I feel like there are some more things which we can add up. One is basically sustainable public procurement laws. But that is something like, at least let's start with a public procurement law, sustainable procurement law. And second one is, as like when Shashwat also reiterated, green standard, like when the product standardization, green product standardization or certification. And then basically like having a kind of a innovation hubs, circular innovation hubs. For example, like Haryana government, Rajasthan government, and also Goa government, they have already started brainstorming on it, and they have already going to come up with some kind of a climate labs or a circular economy labs, and all. And then basically like a nodal agency which can actually basically like deals with the information sharing, readiness assessment of that particular sector, and also does the monitoring and evaluation of those different laws which they have put. Because monitoring and evaluation is something which has actually been, tossed off, and which we have to definitely, make it sure that, whatever the laws we are bringing, whatever the regulations we are bringing, it had to be monitored and to be evaluated in going forward to bring it into the loop. And the last but not the least, in terms of the nodal agency, if I can talk about a circular economy sector, is something we can build as a center of excellence for circular economy, as a nodal thing which can actually collaborate with all the different stakeholders in all the different stages of circular economy, starting from the awareness, starting from the readiness assessment, to then that of the monitoring kind of a thing. So the whole thing can be actually held by the center of excellence on circular economy. So these kind of some of the, let's say, the policy instruments or policy mechanisms which we can actually propose to the government and take it forward.
Definitely. And what I think Amar and Shashwa touched upon were more from a policy and regulatory perspective of how an ecosystem should be built. But also wanted to hear from Sanjay in terms of what is your perspective of an ecosystem, and what do you define by a thriving ecosystem that helps with net zero? Is it something similar or is it different? So would like to hear from you.
So I think we'll go back to our old MBA days. We had a Porter theory of competitiveness. That it's all about company, the customer, the competition, the regulators, and also about the R&D labs. And also the setup of MSMEs around who will be supporting these ecosystems. So this all together build up the competitiveness or ecosystem of the place. For example, if we say a place like Bangalore in India, which is very much about the IT industry, and ecosystem started building up around the talent maybe 50 years back when the engineering colleges came up over there, and the government brought in the policies over there, and then we had all the Infosys and Wipros starting up over there, and today's date it's a modern hub. It's another Silicon Valley in India. Same way you see automotive hubs which have come up, say in somewhere in around Pune area. It's all started with Tata Motors long back, who developed the entire ecosystem of the suppliers, ecosystem of various tool makers, ecosystem of the then all this ARAI, the Automotive Research Institutes. I think all these things put together make up an ecosystem. The government, the company, the R&D labs, the testing labs, the institutions for giving knowledge, and institutions for giving the talent. I think all these together make up the ecosystem. And just on the policy view, I'll say it's very, very important for a company to know what the policy is going to come. And in a few years' time, there are two ways out. Either government announces that by 2030 we are going to have this policy, or we have to keep on getting senses from what has happened in Europe by the Green Deal or the topics which have EU taxonomy topics over there, because by sooner or later they will come over here. For example, just 2-3 years back in India, we had in the auto industry had to suddenly jump from BS4 to BS6 standards. It was really expensive and really backbreaking for us, but we could do it. Same way in Europe, today's date, the vehicle emission targets are 99 gram per kilometer CO2. India, it's 113 grams. So if we are really able to forecast, to see that crystal ball, what type of changes are going to come into the ecosystem, I think that will help us a lot to align towards what is needed. Because ultimately, it's where the regulations come, then you have to really forget about the thinking about the economics part, but you have to be compliant first. So I think a two-pronged strategy about really establishing the entire ecosystem around the competitive ecosystem. Around it's also about having the consumers nearby. It's also having the transporters and logistics provider nearby. And the transporter and logistics provider in terms of IT technology can be about the bandwidth and can be about the hosting services or the cloud services also. So we have to see this entire ecosystem. I mean, I think that's a very old classical theory from Porter, but that will work here also equally well. Thank you.
Yes, definitely. And there is with the ecosystem, while you were talking about competitors, but there is also the ecosystem which brings and collaborates everyone together. So that's also the perspective that comes in with the ecosystem and
Absolutely.
that need here. So last question for our panelists. So at MASH, we enable and we help young change makers build careers in social impact and innovation. So there has been a very strong interest from students, not just from college but from school itself, who want to understand how to build a career in this space. And I was recently talking to one of my cousins, and she was telling me that now what they get as homework are SDGs. So focus on goal 6, which is clean water, and then goal 7. So that's what has led to. So the holiday homework comprises of SDGs now. And what would be your advice to the people or the young people who are watching this live right now? So again, going around the panel from Shashwat, let's start with you.
I think, I mean, it's great to hear that that's happening, first of all. But I think overall, the reason that there's been a shift is increasing customer awareness. That's obviously there. Increasing regulatory pressure, obviously, that varies as we've discussed, is subjective to the sector, etc. But it's still there. It has, I mean, compared to, I don't know, when I was in school, there's obviously a lot more today. Same thing with corporates. There are a lot more commitments. It's a lot more in the news. And I think all of that is driven by the fact that we sort of realize that we are screwing up the planet, so we have to do something about it. And I mean, if you start studying about it, you are more aware of the consequences of your actions. So I think that's where it's coming from. That there's just increased awareness, which is especially spilling over from our Western counterparts. And I think if we can actually utilize that and innovate on that, then I mean we'll probably be the leaders. So that's why I think it's happening, and it's only a good thing.
Great. And what would be your advice, if any, to people who are interested or who are in this space? Any focus on skills or careers, courses?
So, I mean, I don't want to set out a curriculum for somebody. I think what I would want recommend is that now there's a lot of knowledge available out there. Like even Coursera has so many education videos, and TEDx obviously. So just I would say just soak in as much as you can instead of just getting through your homework, and then decide what you want to dig deeper into. I think that there is a lot of knowledge available out there today, a lot of blogs, etc. The other thing I would recommend, once you realize that this is the sector that you want to focus on, is actually look at what the startups are doing, right? Because they have identified certain problems that need immediate solution, and that would tell you what are the problems that currently the world faces, and what are the potential problems that might happen in the future. So I think that's where a buzzing startup ecosystem is also a very good place to look at.
Thanks, Shashwat. Moving on to Amar.
Yeah, I would say, like, 2 points very quickly. The first one is, like, parents are going to be the ones who are, like, definitely have to educate their kids about whatever is happening. Just to give a very quick example, like, I just 2 months ago when I was in India, I went to a picnic with a niece of mine, like niece and my brother's family and all, and we woke up with a view of, like, really sunrise and all, but there was so much of waste. And my 4 years niece, she said, like, oh, look at this waste and all, and there is a sunrise. We need to find people. I don't know where she heard it, but this is something, like, when we need to educate our kids. The parents have to take this challenge and educate our kids on these kind of topics. And the second one is Atal Incubation Labs are doing the good job as well already in some of the colleges, and not only in the universities, Atal Incubation Centers, but Atal Incubation labs in the colleges and schools are doing a good job. And maybe, like, they should actually start involving the climate change and the circularity kind of topics in their labs as well. So that is some kind of a suggestion which Niti Aayog or the Atal Incubation Mission can take it up as well.
Yes, and a lot of entrepreneurship development programs are actually now moving to schools to find young change makers who are working in the space. Lastly, from you, Mr. Sanjay, any last thoughts on, like, on how young students can build a career in the space?
So, first of all, let us see that this is not a different space. It has to be inculcated into each and every aspect of our life on a day-to-day basis. Only thing, this awareness needs to be built up, that our surrounding, that is, I mean, our atmosphere that we are working in, whatever area we work, whether we are working as a lawyer or working as a CA or working as a company secretary or working as an engineer or a doctor, anywhere, it's applicable into each and every profession. I think it's very important to have a small, I think a semester's program should be there into each and every course on this topic, which should expose them on regulations, which should expose them on decarbonization, circular economy. I think a doctor also needs to understand very much a topic of circular economy. So much of medical and biomedical waste gets generated every year. So it's important that each and every aspect of our training, this should be there. I think it should be part of the college schools curriculum also. And I think every smart person will be able to observe where the problems are and able to solve a problem. And that's where the entrepreneurship starts. You solve a problem, and that's where you make money also, and that's where you solve the bigger problem of the world. It's not just I'll say it's separately a career. It's a part of each and every ecosystem. It has to be part of.
Fantastic. And I completely agree that it is a lens that you need to build in and not a separate career itself. So everything will be more focused in and more climate centric now on, instead of just building a separate career in the climate space itself.
Yeah, I'll say that climate change and sustainable development goals. If we just remember these two words, I think they cover each and every aspect of the human development.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. So, thank you to all the panelists. Now we're moving on to the next panel, which is on regenerative agriculture. And thank you all for your time today. Lastly, ending it, so climate solution innovation is no less urgent, and it offers an enormous opportunity to build economic models and individual company advantage for the long term. So until now, companies, investors, governments have seen climate actions and considerations as a hindrance. Meeting targets could limit growth. But now, as we also discussed, that through ecosystem collaborations and also through more funding getting into the space, there is a lot of scope for it to grow further. So that's all for today in terms of climate innovation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Urja. The type of energy you have brought in this process is really great, and really must congratulate Mass Foundation for this innovative work and very much needed work. Thank you.
Totally
Thank
second
And thank you,
part.
my dear panelists, Amar and Shashwat. Look forward to be in touch with both of you.
Thank you, Sanjay. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Bye. So, so as we move on to the next panel, I would like to introduce Dr. Gurpreet Singh, who will be moderating the session on regenerative agriculture. Dr. Gurpreet Singh holds a degree in the climate space, and he works as a field operations manager at the Nature Conservancy. He holds a PhD in agricultural management, where he studied about water saving technology adoption in water intensive crops. Since his undergraduate, he's taken several initiatives in empowering farmers and training the youth and farmers on good agricultural practices. So welcome to the panel, Gurpreet, and now setting the stage for you. All yours.
Thank you, Urja. I hope I'm audible to the audience.
Yes.
Yeah.
All good.
Thank you so much for this, beautiful introduction. So, and it's a good opportunity for all of us to come together and, create a discourse towards, a better world. And I think this, when we talk about climate change, we cannot separate agriculture out of it. As we all know that, it's a major contributor to the climate change and the challenges. Agriculture is both a victim and a perpetuator in the climate change discourse. As we know, the sector is one of the biggest emitter and the largest consumer of groundwater. So together with forestry and other land use, agriculture is almost contributing 27%, and the major component is coming from animal husbandry, rice production, and pesticides and fertilizer production. So for a context, total emission just from dairy and meat industry alone produces emissions which is greater than countries like United States, Russia, and India. So with climate change, the food security challenge will only worsen. It's not going to, it's going to, because of the climate change vagaries, there'll be, food insecurity will be, affected. And as we know, the world will need to produce about 70% more food as per a report by World Bank by 2050 to feed an estimated 9 billion people. But we know climate change will result in lower productions. For example, this year itself, because of heat, during a critical stage of wheat crop, the production has gone down from 50 to 20%, according to a study by CIMIT. Even when we go to the field, in my recent visit in some of the villages in Punjab, we saw there was up to 10 quintals per hectare, reduction in the wheat yield. And this is huge. This is huge. As we know that, the food security is largely dependent on two kind of cereals in India, rice and wheat. And Punjab is a hub for both the production, Punjab and Haryana, of course. So now the farmers are very anxious about what will happen in next year. So while being vulnerable to climate change, agriculture also has a vital role to play in helping us end this crisis through carbon sequestration. And it will only happen through regenerative agriculture and possibly, I think, also critically adopting plant-based diet. There's a lot of conversation happening around, vegan diet and vegetarian diet. Definitely, India is way ahead on that aspect as compared to Western countries. But given the change in the climate, asking farmer to shift to a new method of cropping might be a challenge. So before we jump into the details of discussions on regenerative agriculture, I would like to introduce our two guests who will navigate us through the critical topic. First, we have Mr. Murli Dhar. He is Director Sustainable Agriculture Program at World Wildlife Fund, India. He has more than 60 years of work experience in corporate research agencies and international organizations, working on technical and management aspects on agriculture and allied subjects in the Southeastern Asia, especially India, China, and Pakistan. He has pivoted leadership in engaging global business and industry, majorly in agri-commodity. And he had recently featured on interviews by Fox Production, France, and National Geographic Channel. And is going to be, aired shortly in globally on NGC and represented WWF globally in a steering level committee. We welcome you, Mr. Dhar. We also have with us Gitanjali Rajmani. She's co-founder and chief operating officer at Farmizon. Farmizon is a social enterprise that allows one to rent a piece of farmland to grow organic food. Gitanjali left her corporate job of 7 years, and since 2013, she has been following her passion of farming and word in organizing food and value chain. She is also the founder of Green My Life, a Bangalore-based landscape design, garden maintenance, and online store. After facing numerous hurdles in her startup journey, Gitanjali is now she stands high in the farmer community and has been an inspiration to many young change makers. Especially, I really like the model much. We welcome you as well, Gitanjali. So before we jump into the discussion on regenerative agriculture, thanks for joining Murli and Gitanjali here in this conversation of regenerative agriculture. I believe that to solve our problem on climate change, we need to focus on our feeds. That is, we need to shift our focus on soil health, and by bringing the soil at center of climate change discourse. When we speak of soil health, the regenerative agriculture becomes critical to understand and discuss. It has potential not only as an on-farm solution, but also as a driver of transformation of global food systems. Let us hear from our guest speakers more about regenerative agriculture. So, Gitanjali and Murli, we will plan it like this. Like we have some certain questions on regenerative agriculture. And maybe you might like to take some time and explain our audience on how we can go further with those questions and the rebuttal to this question. So the first question to both of you, you can go either ways to answer this question. What, according to you, would be the guiding principle behind regenerative agriculture in India?
Okay. Thank you, Gurpreet, and nice to see you here, Muralidhar. So this question that you asked about the guiding principles behind regenerative agriculture, right? And you were just talking about farmers in Punjab. So I think if you look at agriculture as a whole in India, then we would need to take a keen look at the history of it and the reason for which we are at this state today, right? So traditionally, we are a nation that used to practice regenerative methods of agriculture. However, the Green Revolution, which was originally initiated as a very short-term measure, more like a steroid to increase our production, enable food security, and give us those much-needed exports, that led to erosion, death, and desertification of our soils. So the topsoil is getting destroyed at an alarming rate every year. And studies say that it's going to last us only about 60 more harvests. And this is not just a concern in India, but this is world over, that the topsoil is getting destroyed, and this concern has been there all over. So regenerative agriculture is probably the only way out for us here. And it's not just important from a climate change perspective, but it's important for all stakeholders in the system, the planet, farmers, and consumers. So I think the guiding principle here is that it's not just important for the planet and climate change, right? But it's important for all the stakeholders. So if I say stakeholders, so looking at regenerative agriculture only as a means to arrest climate change, save the planet and its soil, it's a fallacy that most of us are guilty of. Adding more life and biodiversity to our soil is something that is beneficial for our farmers and consumers too. So at Farmazin, so you talked about us being a rent-a-farm model. We also are a marketplace which connects organic farmers directly to consumers. So we deal with a lot of farmers, and we hear stories from our farmers of how when they used to practice conventional agriculture, their yields would go down every season, right? And they would have to pump in more chemicals year after year to keep their yields constant. So regenerative agriculture de-risks them against this. And it improves their asset value, which is the land for them. For the consumers, how it helps is food from regenerative agriculture is better for them, as healthier soils give more nutrient-rich food. This is something that has a direct impact on their health, right? So one basic equation that we keep reiterating at Farmazin is that soil health is equal to plant health is equal to consumer health. People only talk about pesticides and chemicals in their produce, but I think it's much bigger than that. And the awareness on that aspect, that healthier soils give rise to nutrient-rich food, that aspect is just not there. I think there needs to be some amount of more awareness towards that. There is, of course, awareness from the government with regards to regenerative agriculture. We are seeing a lot of it in the recent past. We see the push towards organic, sustainable methods of agriculture, like the Subhash Palekar natural farming method, the what we saw in Sikkim with organic, but there's a lot more to do. The effect that regenerative agriculture has on the planet is, of course, quite evident. There's additional carbon sequestration that you talked about, and it gets added back to the soil. Carbon in the air is not good, but carbon in the soil is good, right? So when we use chemical fertilizers, very small percentage of it is actually absorbed by the plants. A large percentage of it is left on the soil in excess, and along with our rains, flows into our water bodies, rivers, finds its way to oceans. This then causes algal blooms, kills of aquatic life, and our oceans, which are our big carbon sinks, it affects their abilities to act as one. So when we kill our oceans, we directly impact climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Gitanjali. Mr. Murli, you would like to, add some points?
Yeah, definitely. I will certainly add, and the Gitanjali and already covered much of the aspects of the principles which we supposed to talk. From my viewpoint of view, because I don't want to be very theoretical to define what should be the principles for regenerative agriculture guiding principle. From our point of view, we should not look the farm as a unit, right? Because the farm is also dependent on other services which comes from the fresh water and other systems. So we have to we have to move out from the farm-led regenerative approach to the system-led regenerative approach. And each of the aspects in the system needs to be regenerative itself, rather than just looking just a soil, because even if we are working on the soil, but there are if the water gets depleted in the same the same system, then there's no point to have that healthy soil in in farms, which will let which we might make the more thirstier. So we need the water also, because the water is again the essential. We have water is also essential. The other services which also comes from the system is, again, it hasn't been talked in India about the, the pollinators, right? Pollinators are also bring, the different kind of productive services. So from my point of view, we have to have a, the broader, the landscape when we are defining regenerative, not only just looking only on the soil, because there has been, the lot of discussion has been happening on the soil, and therefore, we are focusing in given the context of, the what is happening in and around. But there are, the other services, those needs to be looked in. If we start just looking one, then we might overlook, the other services, and those are as critical as this, the services which comes from the soil, right? So this was, my initial thought. I thought I should put across to, the layer context for the discussion.
Right. Thank you so much. I mean, I too also believe that it's there should be like a complete system approach rather than just looking things in silos, like soil as a one of the component, crop as a one of the component, water as another component, and of course there is another biodiversity, like as you also mentioned, that bees are also really critical for the system. So definitely there should be a system approach which should be followed in terms of regenerative agriculture. Thanks for that. My next question would be regarding, while the progress, in India, regenerative agriculture have progressed a bit over the past few years, but there are still significant barriers which is holding us back. What do you think are these, critical aspects which we need to focus on, and how can we overcome these barriers?
Is this to me or
Yeah,
Gitanjali?
I think it's an open. I mean,
Okay.
it's for both of you. Yeah.
Okay, so I can take a liberty because since Gitanjali is on mute, so I can take a liberty to speak before her. Yeah, I think that there are. I don't think there hasn't been much done in the in India on the regenerative agriculture. We might be having a very tiny projects who might be complying the regenerative principles. I haven't seen. At this point of time, push is coming from the uptakers. There are the many big companies. They have taken a pledge in order to the align their the supplies from where they are procuring the raw material, like PepsiCo and other companies. They have taken a pledge. The push is coming from the the uptakers. Uh, I think that push will not going to bring the transformation which we are expecting to have at the farming level unless we change the complete ecosystem. So the farmers, if you see, that they are heavily relying on anything from the, for say, the fertilizer use. If we wanted to transition from the nitrogen to the, to carbon-based, the agriculture system, then there is needs to be, the technological support needs to be brought in order to make happen that, because the just replacing nitrogen with carbon, it's required a, the big change the way the systems are. So we need to, the way that ecosystem needs to be ready, who can enable the change which we are expecting on the one side. And there we don't see the much technological the innovation has been coming in that space which enable the transition. Say, as I said, the classical example of the nitrogen. Right now, the nitrogen is the one nutrient who dictates the agriculture. And changing from nitrogen to the carbon, you need a complete 360-degree shift the way the technologies are out there. And we need to, to bring carbon in the center of the technology to push into the system so that the carbon can be a part of, the production system, which is not there, unfortunately. So this is one, the one initiative, one, the barrier which I see. The second barrier is, since the private uptakers will take some time to to recalibrate the with the requirement of of the agriculture system. During that time, this is the moral responsibility of the government to bring some sort of capital investment to push innovation, which is also not there. So these are the two big barriers which I see. One is the appetite of the private stakeholder at the on the bottom of the is not there. Though the uptakers, they have been taking a pledge, right? We have been hearing Cargill and many big giants. They wanted the regenerative products in their supply chain, but back-end support system is not there. As I said, it will take some time to, the prepare till, the whole ecosystem will be ready. We need a public investment to build that readiness so that the transformation can be built. So I'm pausing it here and then wish to hear, what other speakers are saying on this topic. Yeah.
Yeah, Gitanjali, over to you. I mean, please unmute yourself. I mean, you're on. Gitanjali, you're on mute.
Yeah, you can hear me now.
Yeah, audible. Yeah, thanks.
So I completely agree with what Mr. Muralidhar said about the awareness not being there yet in India. In fact, in the US also, we've just been talking about regenerative agriculture for the last maybe 5-6 years. But yes, there has been a big push from big companies, Cargill, he mentioned, Danone, General Mills, etc., towards regenerative agriculture. From a company perspective, from the industry, what I can say for barriers that are there is that in India, most of these barriers are systemic barriers. That is, uh, regenerative agriculture involves polyculture or growing multiple crops, right, in the same field. As in nature, in forests, you don't find monoculture or the same plant growing for acres. It is of polyculture, right? So our systems in India, our supply chain systems are built for monocultures. Monocultures in conventional farming is more tuned towards high production. Our goals themselves are flawed. We need high yields, but it doesn't matter if it's the same crop or the same strain of rice the entire country eats, right? Our supply chains are built according to that. So a farmer who's growing, say, 10 acres of sugarcane, yielding tons of it, he would find it far easier to sell his produce than a farmer who has 10 acres again. He's growing hundreds of kgs of mangoes, oranges, lemons, carrots, beetroots, greens, aloe vera, bamboo shoots, etc., all in the same farm. So somebody who's growing a single crop finds it much easier to sell it. Now that's a problem with how our systems are built in India. So these supply chain systems need to be optimized for regenerative farming. That is a barrier right now, and they do not exist right now. So this is one of the things that we are doing at Farmers, that we tell our farmers to grow different varieties so that we also can have an increased basket size for our customers too. And this, again, what it does is that it cuts your carbon miles down, because it's coming, you have an increased basket, you have an increased variety of vegetables coming from a shorter distance. So knowledge also about regenerative farming is still not enough. That's the second thing, which is a barrier, right? It's important for farmers to unlearn what they know and what they've been practicing over these last few decades before they can start learning ways of regenerative agriculture. Another thing, which is a very important thing, is customer sensitization. How we do agriculture is vastly dictated by what the customer wants. So consumers in India tend to underpay for food. This we've seen. It's also a very political driven thing to a large extent to keep the costs of food low. The cost of food, hence, is not the true cost, because it does not include the cost of destruction to the environment. It does not include the future costs of irreparable damage to the soil. So we in India are a very value conscious society, but our definition of value really needs to change here when it comes to food that we're eating. Currently, the system is skewed towards the consumer in terms of the actual price they pay. The industrial food system is unfair to the farmer whose soil now comes with a shelf life, right? So in regenerative agriculture, there's no hidden costs. There are only benefits. So we need to change this and get customers more sensitive to regenerative agriculture. Again, next, and a very important thing is knowledge to agricultural practitioners. If you go to our agricultural universities and just go through the textbooks that are there, there's almost a fleeting, almost hesitant mention of organic farming. And forget about regenerative farming, you probably not even find that there. This needs to change. These they have to be intensely educated on regenerative agriculture, as they are the guys working in agri input organizations and even policymakers. Even they go to become agricultural policymakers. So our textbooks need to change. Our educational institutes need to have a more holistic approach towards education about soil health, the environment, agriculture, and all that it ties to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gitanjali and Murli, on telling us about the barriers on what are the key barriers. I mean, it also reminds me, I was visiting a village, in Gujarat. There was a farmer. He had actually cultivated 14 different crops in a piece of 2 acres of land, and it was a very systematic arrangement of crops that every 20 days he will get some harvest of a particular crop. So rather than having like a monoculture, which is which have a lot of risk associated with it, examples like these, when a farmer is cultivating like different crops at a different intervals, and it will actually go to the market at different intervals of time. I mean, it also reduces the risk of the farmer. So definitely biodiversity is one of the critical, diversification of the system is really important, and consumer sensitization is really important. So my next question to you, Gitanjali, is again related to the consumer side of it. We need to understand, given your experience building Farmazon, could you highlight some of the stocking trends which has been happening over the over the, like, say 4 years in the consumer demands, especially when it comes to from the context of regenerative agriculture? You definitely have mentioned, but specifically what trends have been we have been seeing in India specifically?
So at this point of time, Gurpreet, most consumers are not aware of regenerative farming. They might be aware of organic farming, but regenerative farming, awareness of it is very, very less. And what that means, right? So the education is more towards organic farming, farming without the use of chemicals and pesticides, which again is not completely regenerative farming. You can practice organic farming without being regenerative and sustainable. So there are definitely more conversations happening now around soil and soil health. We are seeing Save the Soil initiatives. We are seeing some talks about regenerative farming, which is all very encouraging. So our customers at Farmazon definitely are the forerunners when we talk to them when it comes to awareness about the food, and they are very keen about the traceability and where it comes from. COVID also brought about a lot of increase in conversations, right, about nutrition, where the food comes from. Also embracing forgotten vegetables, greens, fruits. Like somebody would say, hey, my grandma used to have, when, my grandma used to talk about 40, 50 different types of rice varieties. We used to have greens that we used to eat in our childhood, which are not available anymore. So customers are realizing that there's more conversation towards that. And as farmers are planting these, because there is a demand, biodiversity is increasing, soil health is increasing. COVID, of course, had a negative impact also, which is that, due to risk of contamination, etc., people said we prefer vegetables that are cleaned and wrapped up in plastic. So that's another problem that is there. But there's definitely more understanding of microbes, a role they play, because there's more understanding of probiotics, etc. They're also conscious of their food preferences. Muralidhar spoke about gluten-free, I think. So there's it's more conscious, organic, non-GMO, gluten-free, all of that. And they're also increasingly demanding to know the origin of products that they're buying from. They want to know where it's coming from. So the whole farm to fork aspect and the traceability concept, as you would have seen in the recent years, there are a lot of companies which are, which have come up calling themselves farm to fork, and they are allowing customers to trace their products and bring about transparency in the entire system. So that's something that's happening. However, I would say that the awareness is still happening in pockets, and it's still day zero as far as awareness about regenerative farming in India is concerned.
Yeah. Excellent. I mean, it'll be great if you can, also tell about your, entrepreneurial journey, why you, jumped into this arena, and what you thought was like really critical for this particular domain.
So it's actually a very simple thing, Gurpreet, that so I worked for 12 years in a corporate. So I was working at TCS, and we and all our travels abroad, right, we would buy organic food. And if we are staying outside, out of the country, there would be sections and aisles for organic food. And then that's when we started realizing that, oh, there's something called organic, oh, there's so many chemicals, pesticides, there were videos doing the rounds. So we started getting very concerned about the food we were eating. And there was no way to really check, right? You buy organic food in the market, they say it's organic, they market it to you as that it's 30% more expensive, but how can you check if it's really organic? So that was a question that sort of was plaguing me, my husband, and another friend of us. Three of us got together and formed Farmers In. So that was a question that was there. So what we did was we just rented out a patch of land just behind our house and said, hey, we are going to grow our vegetables and we are going to try this out. Because people in a city don't get that, how much can they grow in a balcony? So we said, let's rent out a small land and try this out ourselves. And it worked out pretty well. And there was a lot of joy in what we were growing and eating. And the taste of what we were growing and the native vegetables was really different from what we were getting out in the market. And we said, this is something that we need to take it back to more people. And that's how Farmers In started. We started by renting out plots to people, saying, hey, this is real life farmville, right? Like, so how you're playing farmville on your mobile, so in the same way you can play farmville on an app and you can actually get vegetables home. So that was how we started out. But now, however, we've expanded, we have pivoted onto a model where we help many more farmers and consumers across the country to grow vegetables and have farmers connect to consumers directly.
Yeah, thank you so much. To tell us, that's very pretty interesting. I mean, I do remember, when I was doing my agriculture, we were also asked to grow some, crops, especially vegetable, rice, and paddy. I mean, cultivating crop in itself is a, it's a very, I would say it's self-satisfying, thing which one can experience in the process. Sometimes, people don't know where the crops are coming from, what part of the, of the plant actually, the products are coming from. For example, groundnut, many people don't know that actually it's coming from the soil, right? So, I mean, I think it's really critical to, to relate the consumer what actually is happening in the field. So, my next question again is to the panel, both Murli and Gitanjali. What are the some best implementation and execution tactics which you think can create value through regenerative agriculture for farmers, specifically women farmers? I mean, you talked about barriers, you talked about what should be happening. We want to understand how should we doing it. Yeah, I mean, how can we impart these values to the farmers, especially women farmers? Yeah. Murli, you would like to go first on that?
Yeah, I can go, very quickly. There's no as such tactics, to bring those newer practices to the farmers. The one thing, that we should consider, that we should not look, the farmers as a living lab for us, right? And they should be part of the transformational journey instead of, the becoming a living lab for regenerative, the extract and where we bring the new technologies and testing with the farmers. So this is one the thing we should avoid while the creating any kind of implementation strategy, which we have often seen the farmers become a victim of the of those the new tax which are coming out. Second is, that we have to be seriously calibrated the risk of the farmers, right? What sort of risk he would be having and how those risks going to be calibrated. Just to give you, the examples, the people would be asking what I'm talking. The one example, suppose today we ask some farmer in some villages to stop using urea, right? And it's very simple thing to say stop using urea, but he in turn he would be having economic risk. So so we need to the adjust that risk, that even if we are saying stop using a urea, then he should have a the alternate solutions which gives him
Right.
as yield as he would be getting from the urea. So that needs to be calibrated. Once those metrics gets calibrated, then it comes to demonstrate those, the newer things to the farmers. Keep in mind, without keeping him as a part of, the living lab. And then those needs to be, the demonstrated how the new things will create a benefit. Again, the in utopian world, we all need, the good biodiversity, because, I'm speaking on behalf of, the wildlife institute, the wildlife uh, institution where I have been working. So it looks very, the good to have a good biodiversity. But the farmers will only go, because we have been talking, with the farmers. We are working with 200,000 farmers in India across the length, breadth of India, from north to south, east to west. But what they need how these kind of new initiative will going to enhance his production, because his economic, his, the risk is on the economics which he's getting out of, the agriculture system. So it's very essential, even whatever the newer concepts are coming, they should be driven to the productive economics. And nature should be a part of that. As I said, the nature has a potential to create those services to get the protection. But it needs to be done calibrated manner. As I said earlier also, we don't have a technologies. Even whatever the technologies are out there, Gitanjali also touched upon, that she was mentioning about the agriculture university. We don't have technologies in place at this point of time.
Right.
And without which, pushing the whole concept will make the farmers as a victim of the of newer concepts. So unless we do have that to push in a very calibrated manner, then we should go in a very straight, very segregated manner, take a baby step first to do a, some kind of analysis, what is out there, do a problem analysis. What we are doing, we do a, the result matrix analysis, we are creating scenarios. Suppose if we are replacing, the urea with X, then whether, how the yield will going to be affected, how much yield farmers will going to be get if we are, changing one system to another. So all the component needs to be, the first well thought through before, that it gets implemented. Otherwise, we might see, the good concept might fail even when we are conceiving the ideas. So yeah, so these are the, the some sort of caution we should consider, while pushing all of these things, because, the again, I will say, the farmer, we all are part of, the big climate action which we have been facing together. But the farmers, the right now, his priority for his livelihood, rather than, the being a global citizen to correct whatever things are happening in and around us. Yeah, I will pause with that. And
Thanks, Murli. Gitanjali would like to go next on that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like Murli said, farmers have to be taken as priority, right? Because they have been given a lot of silver bullets in the past, saying, "Oh, this is going to transform. Put so much money in building a probably greenhouse. This will transform things for you, or put money in organic farming and do this particular activity. This will transform." So that is something that farmers have become very wary of, right? So we'll have to do something. Any changes that we have to do, we have to keep the farmer in number one priority before implementing that change. Uh, from a small company perspective, that what we have seen and what we have seen sets apart successful farmers, and there are some things that successful farmers do in regenerative agriculture, and these would be tips for other farmers to probably think about, not at a policy level, but more from a what can a farmer do, if what sort of a tactic can he implement, what sort of execution strategy can he implement. So from that point of view, if I have to put down few points, there would be most successful farmers in regenerative farming are the ones who have tried to build their own brand, right? Spent more time in creating awareness education, and who sell directly to consumers. If you're a responsible farmer and you want to be rewarded for being responsible, then you've got to not just be a producer of your vegetables and sell it, but you have to also be a marketer for your produce. So a cabbage from Pragati Farms grown by farmer Baswaraju is any day better than a nameless, faceless cabbage, right? So
Right.
successful, so that is important. So you'll have to build your brand. and sell directly. Successful farmers don't just have one thing to sell. So we spoke about polyculture. So since they are directly selling to consumers, it would be beneficial for them to go to the farmer with a variety of produce. Else the customer would have to depend on other ways, right? Now, how does a small farmer fight with a Goliath like a big basket? How do you fight economies of scale? Because a seller like Big Basket will always have the advantage of price, as he's buying in bulk from various prices farmers at throwaway prices, right? So you can beat economies of scale only by creating economies of community. So if you're a farmer and you grow multiple things in a regenerative method, you can reach out to an apartment community and sell directly to them. We've seen farmers do that and become very successful at it. With this again comes creating communities of farmers also. So instead of just being one farmer selling five different things, create a community or a group, a consortium of farmers. Creating this has several advantages, not just of selling different things to your consumers, but also of sharing costs, like renting out a tractor together or buying a tractor together, best practices, sharing best practices, etc. And you also end up clubbing your deliveries together, so you save up on logistical costs also, right? Also, figure out how to innovate your products and create value added products. So this is something that our farmers don't do, and farmers abroad do very successfully, right? Say you have a lot of tomatoes, much more than you can sell. Can you make sun dried tomatoes out of it? Can you make ketchup? So women, since you spoke about women, Gurpreet, women here are much better at this, right? Because they are better at figuring out value added products, as primarily they are the ones who cook still. So primarily they are the ones who make decisions regarding nutrition in their households. So regarding value added products, things like that is something that they can come in. The sad part is, though the majority of our farming workforce consists of women, but the image that comes to our mind when we talk about an Indian farmer, it's always of a man, right? It also doesn't help that the majority of the land records are in the name of the men. So women might be the majority of farming staff, but the land records are mostly in the name of men. So from a consumer point of view, women are mostly the decision makers for what their family would eat. They're more equipped with the knowledge of nutrition, all of that for their families. Thus, it becomes a natural match for women farmers to be at the forefront of what to grow and what to plan their, how to plan their farming. Also, unlike conventional agriculture, where the work at the farm, it would be in phases, right? Sowing would be a big phase, fertilizing, harvesting, etc. In regenerative farming, it's more about an everyday thing. It's more about tending to your farm on an everyday basis. So as nurturing, tending to your soil, plants, etc., these are the main tasks in regenerative agriculture. Because if you're growing different crops have different times of sowing, different crops have different times of harvesting and fertilizing and all of that. So in this, women as their natural caregivers, nurturers, they understand this kind of farming better. We've also seen that our women farmers do better at this sort of planning. They have a good planning of, okay, I'm going to grow palak now. This patch is going to be palak. And again, after 15 days, I'm going to sow one more patch of palak so that I have a constant supply. They know how to juggle these things because they have done it at home, juggling vegetables that they have at home, juggling what should their family eat, all of that. So they're naturally good at this. So I think that's a main important role that they can play. These are again tips for the small farmer. These are again tips for which, and India, as we are a nation of small farmers, 90% of our farmers are small farmers with land holdings of about 2 acres and such. These are some of the things that are easily implementable.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Actually, that was really critical. I'm seeing some questions in the chat box. I think we can take it towards the end of the discussion, maybe. So I think one question, I think there are so many terminologies which are there, I think I can take this question right away, right? Would you like to take this question? So the question is, I think, related to, there are so many terminologies which are existing in the, space of agriculture. You have organic agriculture, then you have natural farming, then you have now this new term, buzz term called regenerative agriculture coming in. Then you also have conservation agriculture, which FAO has promoted in, in their spaces. I mean, how we are, placed to actually not get confused in so many terminologies. I mean, maybe you might like to clarify the difference between organic agriculture and say regenerative agriculture. I mean, Gitanjali or maybe Murli, you might like to, have a viewpoint on that. Gitanjali, you're on mute.
I'm sorry, I keep going on mute. Maybe Murli can supply more, add to this, but from a, if I have to differentiate between an organic or to differentiate how organic, just being organic doesn't mean you're regenerative. To give an example of that, you might buy vermicompost or organic um, farm manure from outside and use it in your farm. You might not use pesticides, you might not use chemical fertilizers, but since you're buying these and using them, you're not, say you're not mulching, say you're not practicing other practices that are sustainable practices, that are key to having biodiversity in your farm. If you're, if you're growing it organically without the use of pesticides and chemicals, you're getting vermicompost from outside, you're growing one crop throughout the farm, these are ways you can still call yourself organic, right? You can say, yes, I'm organic, I'm not using anything else. But is this regenerative? No. So regenerative is again, farming, and as Murli said, grazing practices also. It involves water also. How it can build your soil quality, how you can build your soil organic matter, and how you can restore degraded soil biodiversity. All this, is more to do with regenerative agriculture. Murli, do you want to add to that? Because there is I saw a political context to it, and I think you'd be able to.
Yeah, I will very quickly, as you already mentioned in a very elaborative manner, how one can distinguish between organic and regenerative. From our point of view, organic is a process-driven, the system where, as Gitanjali was mentioning, there is a non-negotiables are there, right? You're not allowed to use any sort of chemicals whatsoever in the system. And then, there is the different kind of audit systems who validates whether the system has use or not. There are different, the verification, the matrices are there, which basically qualifies the product which is coming out or the farm, how is organic. Regenerative is much longer. It's not a process driven, it's an impact driven, the system, where we are expecting, the soil and all the, the allied natural services should become so regenerative to produce, the whatever the produce is coming from those land by itself. So that is the difference between, the organic and regenerative. There are different definitions are available. Those definitions clearly distinguish between, the organic and regenerative. As Gurpreet mentioned, there are many definitions which I don't think we have a time to, dwell upon. Like, there is a sustainable agriculture definition is there, the people often using that. There is another definition which FAO often uses to de-intensify the agriculture system. So where they talk about, the sustainability in intensification system. So there are, but the each definition has its own evolution, and the each definition, each system is different from other system, and there is a clear, the boundaries are defined and determined for each systems. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Murli and Gitanjali. I mean, that was really helpful. I mean, to add to what Gitanjali and Murli has just told, I mean, in regenerative agriculture, basically there are 5 major principles. One is that you don't have to disturb the soil. You don't plow the soil. You just directly sow the seeds. Second is, I mean, there might be contention on that as well. How that can be done. It's beyond this it's the scope of this conversation here. Second is you keep the surface of the soil covered with live mulch and live, or dead residue. Maybe it can be done through happy seeder or any other technology which can directly sow the seed. Third is related to the biodiversity, which I think the panelist has talked in different ways. There should not be monocultures. There should be polyculture in existing, and there should be live soil. We have to treat the soil as a living entity, not like a dead entity, right? And third, which Gitanjali was also pointing out too, that we need to bring back our animal system. That we have to bring back our animals in the system, not looking as the in the silo of just production of crops. So thank you so much, Murli and Gitanjali. My last question to the panel is related to what kind of policies, there are already existing policies in the space. What exactly do you think, from the business perspective, Gitanjali, and from a development professionals perspective, Murli, what would be like critical to take this forward, right? There's so many already existing policies, and what could be done more to, as you already said, that farmers' risk need to be covered. So maybe on some bullet points, you can, just tell what can be done from the government's perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, I can come quickly on this. There are the different initiative has been taken it up by the different governments. We have been hearing on the the policy space, like recently Madhya Pradesh government and earlier Andhra Pradesh government. They were very proactive to bring some sort of principles which you just spoke. Uh, in order to, as we, I think we are all on the same page, that we have to have a, the nature-based system agriculture rather than, the is driven by chemicals and other. So in order to do that, we need to have a comprehensive policies, which basically help farmers to bring that transition. And also, I will not going to argue on the subsidy because the subsidy then become a very political subject. But there kind some sort of incentives needs to be given to those farmers who are early uptakers, and that will the that would be having a ripple impact in in the villages or in the districts or in, and what should be the the incentive structure, how should it look like, that is the economics needs to work it out, right? Because the, as I said, farmers risk not to be taken as a granted, so it needs to be compensated somewhere, and the incentive structures can play a critical role in order to bring the transformation which we hope and look for the agriculture system, right? With this I'm really thankful to the organizer. I will let the Gitanjali to speak before we the finish off. So yeah, I'm thankful to organizer and Gurpreet to moderate this session. I have to leave unfortunately, so this is the reason I'm just ending my talk here. And see you sometime. Right? Bye from my side. Gitanjali.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Gitanjali would like
Yeah,
to go
so
on this.
yeah, so I think Murli pretty much covered that. All I would say is I think there has to be a lot more of public-private partnerships in this, a lot more startups needed in the agri-tech area, more awareness, and the and awareness to consumers should not just be driven by companies which have organic produce, right, or which are doing, but awareness should be driven by the government also to consumers about organic produce and how it's better for you, and about regenerative agriculture. So supports to farmers, because for the first few years when they are shifting from a chemical farming, conventional chemical farming, to a regenerative farming, they might not get the yields that would give them money. So some sort of a support, some sort of a, I'm not again talking about subsidies, but some sort of support in terms of knowledge, in terms of inputs, in terms of something else can be done. I think that would also make a big impact.
Okay, thank you, Gitanjali. Allow me, give me an opportunity to summarize what we discussed. You and Murli has discussed. Our discussion I think can be categorized in major 5 drivers. First, 4 drivers. I mean, so saying one can be technological, as Murli was mentioning on technology shift from nitrogen-based system to carbon-based systems. They also need to shift to a polyculture system. I think that will also fall in the domain of the technology as a driver. There are other technologies like direct seeding rice, happy seeder, as we are doing in the Nature Conservancy to promote direct seeding rice as well as happy seeder, to prevent crop residue burning, especially in Punjab and Haryana. We also need to shift to integrated pest management. That will again come into the domain of the technology. Apart from technology, I think which the panel has discussed was on institutional driver, which is also critical. As you mentioned, that we need to create community of farmers, those who will actually drive regenerative agriculture, and also the community of the consumers to come forward, to demand these kind of products, which has the value of, low carbon emission, products. I mean, definitely it needs to be communicated to them as well, and which is why traceability becomes also important. And the infrastructure becomes, to create such kind of infrastructure will also fall in the domain of, of institution, creating such institutions, and say, to reduce the risk, we also need to work on insurance or maybe carbon credit to these farmers, those who will actually adopt. I think the carbon credit market has been like growing really well. We have been trying to to link our farmers to the carbon credit market. Third would be the economic driver, which will include value chain development of regenerative agriculture from from downstream to upstream. We need to work on that, and that can also include incentivizing the farmers, those who will actually adopt these practices. And the last and the very important one is which is behavioral change, which is really important for the farmers, because there's this behavior of adopting urea and plying deep cultivation. I think now it's becoming problematic for our agriculture system. So the creation of social norm will become really important, and awareness not just for the farmers. Every time it will, as Murli also pointed, that farmers have become lab for our all our experiments. Policymakers, NGOs, and everyone is trying to do some kind of experiment on the farmers, but nobody is actually thinking from the farmers' perspective that it's their sole bread earning activity, and they cannot just experiment anything on it. So on that point, I think demonstrations will be really important to change the behaviors. We demonstrate on a smaller scale of land, and then slowly and gradually the farmers can pick the best practices from there. So I think, having said that, the panel discussed on the 4 key drivers. That's what we discussed. Thank you, Gitanjali, for your wonderful insights on regenerative agriculture practices. So thanks once again. Yeah, over
Thank
to
you so
Urja
much.
to conclude the session. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Gurpreet. Thank you, MASH Global, for this.
Thank you so much, Gurpreet. This was a great discussion, moderated and summarized by you. So I would like to express my gratitude to all the esteemed speakers for their contribution and presence for the first edition of the OneEarth Dialogue. Also, thank you to our partners, Daily Hunt and Shiv Nadu University, for all their support. We will be continuing with engaging multiple stakeholders through these dialogues and more discussions on climate, sustainability, and ESG. Stay tuned to our social media handles to know more about our work and also engage with us. Thank you, everyone, for your time today.